Alrighty then. Um, let's make sure we have this leaning back enough. Look what just came in the door today. This is my I guess it's my Valentine's Day present to myself. Since it does not appear as if a present will be forthcoming from anywhere else. And I think we can all figure out why that is. Those days are over for me. So I just, whoopsie. I guess any love that I might have had, or might have had left to express toward another human being, I just transfer it over to all of my violins. This violin is an American violin that was made by an American maker by the name of Oliver Fraser. Fraser. Oliver Fraser. He has been known to firebrand the inside back of his violins with a firebrand that says O.L. Fraser. He also used paper labels later on. His earlier violins were all just firebranded, apparently. This fiddle here is dated 1922, which was pretty late in his career. He only had a few years left, a handful of years left to his violin making career before he went toes up. But this fiddle bears a paper label that says O.L. Fraser, Saginaw, Michigan, 1922. And strangely enough, he kind of draws some clouds, like just cloud shapes across the top of the label, which is kind of interesting. Not sure why he may have been compelled to do so. Maybe he just happened to be fond of clouds. This violin, the scroll is like ultra weird. Check that scroll out, man. The turns on the scroll, the turns are quite far apart. It's really huge. The twist, the turns of the scroll are cut in such a way that it's quite unusual. Most fiddles have. Let's see. I've got a fiddle here. Do a little comparison. See the central nipple, and then the turns that go around it. All much more squeezed in together. This one here, completely different look about it. Quite unorthodox, if I may say so myself. But huge pattern. Let's see. Where's my consarn it, dadgummit. Nothing but A1 professional grade videography here. .360, 360 millimeters, 14 1/8 inch body length. 360 is quite a robust pattern, if I may say so. That's a robust pattern by any measurement. But what's also quite, yeah, see, he's 212 millimeters wide for the lower bout. That's all we need to look at for right now. But it's a big ass fiddle. A big ass fiddle. The seller indicated to me that it had a masculine sound. That's now that I have received the violin and had a chance to go through it and adjust it and check it out, see what kind of tone it has. Yeah, I can see why he might have said such a thing. Masculine indeed. It's got a big, ballsy, wide open sound. There's not much in this fiddle that I would describe as sweet. It's and here again, I haven't achieved the final setup yet. I have to plane the fingerboard, and that's going to take some considerable mass out of the neck fingerboard combination. That's going to lighten up the sound of it, I believe. Perhaps hard to say exactly how that will affect the tone of this particular fiddle. But I think that the fellow that sold this to me, who lives in the little town of Candler, North Carolina, he's an old man, at least as old as me. He contended that he has been a violin repairman his entire life. I think there's no question that he probably regraduated the interior of this violin. The top has the kind of sound as if it is quite a bit thinned out, and possibly even too much so, which is, be that as it may, the bass bar seems to have a much better than average profile, so that's good. I think he thinned out the top a little bit too much, but we have ways. I have ways of correcting that. O.L. Fraser, Saginaw, Michigan, 1922. But anyway, getting back to the fellow from whom I bought it, he apparently hails from a little town called Candler, North Carolina. And Candler, I looked it up on the map. It's no more than 10, 15, maybe 20 miles south of Asheville, which, if any of you have been following the news over the last 4 or 5 months, you would know that Asheville, North Carolina was virtually completely wiped off the map by that goddamned Hurricane Helene. And so was a large swath of western North Carolina, going up northwest from Asheville. If you go out of town toward the northwest and west, there was a huge swath of the mountains up there that received several feet of rain in a very, very short period of time. such that the rivers just went completely out of control, like biblical apocalypse, out of control, and just wiped out entire towns. The rivers overflooded their banks. It was like it was essentially one and the same phenomenon as we have out here in the desert here in Arizona, but what we call flash floods, where there's so much water comes down so fast, it just it doesn't have time to soak in. It just runs off along whatever channels are there, and in most cases there would already be some riverbeds and river channels. Out here in Arizona, we have a lot of what we call dry washes. In fact, I live right next to one. About a couple hundred yards that way is the Santa Cruz River Wash, and it's stone cold, bone dry most of the year, most of the time, except for when it rains, in which case it will collect up a little bit of a trickle, maybe a foot deep down the central, somewhere along the central channels of the wash. It's a big wash, huge. But there have been some unusual rains. There was one in the 90s. One in particular was in 1983 when I still lived here. I saw it with my own eyes. The entire wash, which is at least 50 yards wide. Now picture that, 50 yards wide and 20 feet deep, was full all the way to the top. A raging, screaming, raging torrent of water, blasting down the wash, heading north. It is said that I recall that there somehow some feller fell into the goddamn wash, or somehow was swept away. They found his body 26 miles away. If you can imagine that. 26 miles away, they finally found his body somewhere. So I'm just kind of rambling on here. This violin apparently was in the possession of this feller in Candler, North Carolina, real close to where all of this Hurricane Helene devastation occurred. Although he said, I messaged a little back and forth with him, he said that he didn't have any problems down where he was at. He was perfectly fine. But he said he knows people that lost everything just north of him. They literally lost everything they owned. Their homes, cars, everything gone, swept away. Unbelievable. So this violin, it's it's going to need to be calmed down a little bit. That's a little wild, to put it mildly. It's a bit wild, but we have ways of doing that. Ultimately, I'm going to do my best to refrain from removing the top and trying to get into the inside of the fiddle. I'm going to do some more things from the outside in, so to speak. In other words, I will probably attempt another bridge fit or two until I achieve some of the improvements I'm hoping will occur. I changed the tailpiece already, by the way. He had a regular ebony tailpiece, quite a long profile tailpiece with a rack of metal fine tuners on it. That was just too much weight on this end down here. So I put on one of these fine Whitners, which I'm very fond of. I also put on a better chin rest strangely enough, he had this really weird antique chin rest on the fiddle, uh, which was embossed John Friedrich and Company. John Friedrich Company was a New York company based right around the turn of the century and into the like 1910s and 1920s. They had in-house bow and violin makers, and of course sales and service, and so forth and so on. A pretty reputable firm, I might add. I think John Friedrich himself made violins. They're fiddles out and about that are labeled and branded by him personally. I think I've seen one. If I remember right, I think we had one in our shop in St. Louis years ago. And to my recollection, it was quite a fine violin, actually. Quite nice indeed. Very competent, very, very high quality woodworking skills. His making skills were very fine. Don't you just love that back? Book matched, curly maple. Yes, sir. Now, I haven't said anything about it yet, but you will notice that if you haven't noticed by now, there's something very seriously wrong with you, and I would seek professional help. But this violin is quite glossy. That is not the original patina of the original varnish, unfortunately. I think this doofus over in North Carolina painted a coat of clear varnish over the whole entire violin. I'm quite certain of it. There are telltale giveaway signs of that having been done, you know. There are little dings, little tiny scratches and little divots and dings in the violin from use that are underneath a coat of varnish. All the old original little wear marks and scuff marks and little where the fiddle got bumped against something and created a tiny little crater. Those are all covered over with this clear varnish. And but yeah, the gloss is the finish of the varnish, the exterior coat of the varnish is unnaturally glossy, and so we know that is a retro thing. It doesn't scare me, you know. I can rub that out with some very fine abrasives and some very, very fine abrasive cloth. We can calm that down and get that bring that into more of a what I would prefer to see is more of a something that actually looks more commensurate with the age of the violin. However, you see weird shit in this business. I remember I went into the Bearden Violin Shop in St. Louis, Missouri, many years ago. Oh my goodness. This would have been, let me think, about 1990, 30 years ago, 35. Or some such number of years. And I was just kind of hobnobbing around the shop looking at stuff. And imagine my surprise when Mr. Gene Bearden himself came out and most of my YouTube subscriptions won't have a clue about this fellow, Mr. Gene Bearden. None of you are likely to have even ever heard of him. He and his brother Doug and Gene Bearden started a violin shop back in, like, I believe it was the 1940s or 50s. Certainly it was at least as early as the 50s and maybe even the 40s. When they were young men, they went into business and opened a violin shop that, strangely enough, became the only game in town. For decades, it was like the number one violin shop in all of St. Louis. They managed to gain quite a clientele with the St. Louis Symphony. They were very, very successful, and started to amass quite a fine inventory of some pretty fine European and Italian violins, and so forth. But at the risk of saying anything that might be construed as slander, maybe I better keep my mouth shut. But what I will say is this. Let's just say that Mr. Gene Bearden and Mr. Doug Bearden both would engage in business dealings that were not 100% on the level. They were both engaged in different kinds of trickery and deception, and even outright thievery. And I know many examples of this from personal first-hand experience, talking firsthand to people, unfortunately, to whom the Beardens mistreated in this way, in one form or another. Actually, I would say it was probably, when I first started playing the violin, I lived less than a mile from the Bearden violin shop. I lived about a mile from the Bearden violin shop, strangely enough. And I had my very first fiddle repaired at that shop. It was an old Hopf that I bought at a yard sale real close to my house. Folks had a yard sale and a bunch of shit out on the tables on the driveway, and there was an old fiddle case there, and I opened it up, and lo and behold, it was an old kind of amber-colored Hopf, all beat up, with an old crappy-ass bow. I took it over to the Beardens, over to Gene and Doug Bearden over there on Delmar Avenue in St. Louis, Missouri. And for $35, they fixed that fiddle up and re-haired the bow. And I had me an outfit, and I took it off to college when I went to college at Denver University in 1971. And I took violin classes when I was there. It was very shortly after that, in other words, very shortly after about 1970 or so, when the Bearden brothers broke up. Something very bad happened between them. They never spoke to each other ever again for the next 20 or 30 years of their lives, until they both croaked. And Doug Bearden moved far, far out into the western suburbs of St. Louis, opened up his own shop out there, and Bearden, Gene Bearden, moved out near, not far from the Lambert International Airport, the main airport of St. Louis, and he found he converted a house into a shop over in that general area, and that is where I went to visit Mr. Gene Bearden. Probably this is around 1990, and I was looking at some fiddles, that he doesn't keep a lot of inventory out in the front of the house to where it would be accessible to the public. You have to sort of, if you want to see a bunch of cool shit, you have to sort of gain his trust and his interest, and he'll take you in the back of the house where he's got some rooms where there's all kinds of stuff laid out everywhere. And but on this particular day, I was sitting in a chair, and I'm not sure what the hell I was doing at that particular moment. Could have been petting their cat. They had a very friendly, long-haired cat that was always greeting customers and walking around the place, and quite a spectacular-looking cat. I thought that was pretty cool that they kept a cat in the shop all day long and just let them run free. The next thing I know, Gene Bearden is walking up to me with a violin in his hand, and he just kind of just hands it directly to me. So I take it from him, and I'm looking at it. He's not saying anything, but what I immediately noticed was how fucking glossy the goddamn thing was. I mean, gloss, gloss, gloss. You could have shaved in your reflection off of this fiddle. I mean, it was just as glossy as it could be. Similar to this violin. Very similar, actually. Just looked like it had been dipped in a liquid pot of some kind of like varnish or glass, liquid glass or something that just made it so spectacularly glossy. And I go, wow, what in the world? But I could tell underneath all of this gloss, there was a very old violin. That was very obvious to me, because I had looked at lots of violins up to that point. I was very familiar with them in many ways, and had already engaged in some significant repair projects of my own. He said that is a. He said what you have there is a Giuseppe Guarneri, from about 1740 or something like that. We're talking about Del Gesù, Giuseppe Guarneri, the Giuseppe Guarneri. We're talking about a maker who was a contemporary of Antonio Stradivari for a few decades, I guess, before Stradivari finally died. And then I believe Giuseppe outlived Antonio for a period of time and continued to make violins for several decades, or thereabouts. Maybe not even that long. But this Giuseppe Guarneri the first thing I had to ask Gene Bearden was, wow, I said, what, man, it's glossy. It looks like it's been like just painted over. He said, well, it kind of came to us that way mostly, but we cleaned up the varnish, and parts of the finish were not in very good shape, so we just cleaned it up, and we actually finished off a very kind of intense French polishing procedure. And so it was mostly French polishing, according to Gene Bearden. It had not actually been painted with clear varnish, and it was French polishing, which is an old ancient technique. Some of you may be familiar with, but he allowed me to actually put a bow on it and play it a little bit, and I'll be honest with you, just between you and me and that Buddha sitting over there, the fiddle did not impress me. It was, but it was a very dark, silky, velvety kind of tone, but it didn't seem very loud. But what the hell do I know? And especially, what the hell did I even know back then? In the hands of a very strong and capable violinist, I'm quite sure that the fiddle would probably have, blown my knickers off. Of course, I was compelled to ask Gene what the price tag was on the dang fiddle. He said, he kind of, I don't know. We're probably going to ask about, probably about 750 grand for this fiddle. Which, if that doesn't tell you how long ago this was, nothing will, because nowadays you could not put your hands on a Giuseppe Guarneri for anything less than about 4 or 5 times that figure. In other words, I can't imagine that would ever be a Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù come up at auction that would be any less than 4 or 5 million, and possibly much more. So anyway, I don't know. I guess I'll give you an opportunity to hear the dang thing. There you have it. The Oliver Fraser. Let's see. Is there anything else I wanted to say about this fiddle? Yes, there is, actually. And that's the fact that I actually have another one. Which I've put up a Facebook post or two with some photographs of the other one. And I think I actually play the other Fraser violin in one of those videos on Facebook. The other Fraser has quite a different look about it. Well, number one, it looks quite a bit older. Apparently, Oliver Fraser started making violins in the 1870s, or thereabouts. And this other fiddle has the patina of a fiddle that's much older than this one. However, this one has been glossed over and doctored with, so maybe it's a little hard to tell. But this does carry the paper label of 1922. Which was way towards the end of Mr. Fraser's career. In Henley's book, his famous and ubiquitous dictionary of violin makers, you will be surprised to hear what I'm about to read. Just for the sake of since we don't have anything fucking better to do than sit around studying all this pointless crap, I'm going to read you the write-up that occurs in Henley's book about Mr. Fraser. Universal Dictionary of Violin and Bow Makers by William Henley. This is not a first edition. I think that he first published this in, oh God, it might have been when was it? I don't know, but this edition here is dated 1973, which is fascinating because a lot of really significant shit happened in my life in 1973, but I won't go into that here. Oliver Fraser, born at a town called Leroy, New York, in 1833. Strange, that's the same year as the incorporation of the Martin Guitar Company in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. Yeah, that's the same. That's the exact year that Martin Guitar Company, famous Martin Guitars, started up.